Hey, this is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm with Labor on the Job. Tonight we're going to be looking at the connection between the new U.S. Attorney in San Francisco and some developments in South Carolina that are important for people to understand in this whole crisis around the U.S. Attorneys. And joining us tonight is Brett Bursey. Brett is the leader of a group called Progressive Network, which is a coalition of unions and other organizations, community organizations in South Carolina. And I first met Brett in the struggle of the Charleston 5 longshoremen who were under attack by the state attorney and were fighting for their union rights. Welcome to the show, Brett.
I'm glad to be here, Steve.
And Brett, what was that Charleston 5 struggle about, and why were you involved in it?
Well, the Longshoremen's Union had been part of our coalition. We started the coalition in '94, and they had been part of our coalition for years when this incident came up, and it became a cause célèbre not only internationally but here in South Carolina, in as much as it was quite clearly a union-busting effort. Just really vicious statements about labor thugs and how we can't surrender control of our docks and our businesses to union thugs. And the original incident happened on the docks during a strike of a non-union ship, and the city of Charleston, where the port's located, brought misdemeanor charges for disorderly conduct against a number of people, and those were settled, and everyone thought the case was over. And then a very ambitious and very conservative Republican Attorney General brought state charges, felony charges of riot against 5 longshoremen. And everyone, including the city fathers of Charleston, thought it was just a political grandstanding. This fella wanted to and did later run for governor, and he was trying to rally his anti-union base with the effort. And the Progressive Network, being a labor union coalition, rose to the occasion and did a lot of educational work in turning out people. I did the logistical work for the big rally that we had in July that I believe you were here. I can't even remember what year it was.
I wasn't there, but I saw the video of it. That was one of the largest labor rallies in the history of South Carolina.
Well, I'm sure it was the largest. There were 7,000 people, and it was quite an event. And then that following November, the trial was scheduled to go forth in Charleston, and it had become such a hot potato that the solicitor that was on the case passed the ball to a neighboring solicitor, and I had made arrangements. We actually rented a piece of property adjacent to the courthouse, made arrangements to put up a circus tent and had a generator and all kind of stuff, and had made arrangements to have the trial proceedings shown on a big screen TV when they decided to drop the charges.
So that was a real victory then for the labor movement.
It was indeed, and we feel that the publicity that was brought to it was more than the people that were in charge of deciding whether to go forward or not were willing to put up with for this Attorney General's political ambition.
And the ILWU here in San Francisco on the West Coast was quite actively involved in supporting that struggle. They raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they brought some of the dockers, ILA dockers here, and were successful in rallying support internationally as well for that struggle.
They were indeed. I remember some of them coming all the way out from San Francisco for the big rally we had.
That's right. Now, what we wanted to talk about now is an incident you were involved in when President Bush came to South Carolina. Why don't you talk about what happened in that incident?
Well, this was in October of '02, and it was Bush's 3rd trip to South Carolina since he'd been elected. And as the director of this coalition, it was kind of my responsibility to help orchestrate opposition to the president. We've got 63 organizations in our coalition, and I'm sure of 63 reasons to protest Bush. And the first time he came, earlier that year, he went to Greenville, South Carolina, and the local police, I had been in touch with them and told them where we were going to be and they told me that the Secret Service, was probably going to come in and preempt them, and they did indeed. And on the day Bush was there, they came to us. There were about probably 75 people there, and they told us that we had to go around behind the Coliseum by the dumpsters, and we refused. They said, "You'll be arrested if you don't move," and we said, "Well, get a bus. There's 75 of us," and they left us alone. The next time he was in town was in Charleston, and virtually the same scenario happened. They told us that we had to go behind the Coliseum, where they'd made a free speech zone with sawhorses in the middle of a blacktop parking lot on an August day that was about 104 degrees. We were set up in a park directly in front of the Coliseum where Bush was speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And when we refused to move, they moved the sawhorses around us.
I see.
So we prevailed again. So on the third trip, I kind of anticipated the same thing. He was speaking in an airplane hangar in Columbia, and the traffic situation was really terrible, and I was the first person there. I was by myself, and they came up and told me the kind of standard thing that you can't be here, you have to go to the free speech zone. And in this instance, it was a half a mile away, completely out of sight. And I said, "No, I'll be fine where I am," and I argued with them for about 15 minutes, and I think maybe 3 of my protester colleagues had showed up by then. And they told me that I was going to have to leave or be arrested. And I had a sign that said, "No more war for oil." And they said that the Secret Service woman was the one that was talking to me, and I said, "Well, what are you going to arrest me for?" And she said, "Trespassing." And I said, "Well, is this airport property? This is public property?" She said, "Well, it's airport property." And I was apparently the only one in the crowd that knew that in 1970, the state Supreme Court in South Carolina had ruled that you can't arrest someone for trespassing on public property because in 1969, a bunch of students from the university here got arrested at that airport, almost at the same location, protesting another Republican president's war, Richard Nixon's war in Vietnam.
So this is a long history.
Long history, and these students were arrested and charged with trespassing. The case went to state Supreme Court, and the charges were dismissed, and I was one of those students. And so I knew they couldn't do what they were telling me they were getting ready to do.
I see.
And so I told them, I said, "Well, you do what you've got to do. I've got to stand here with my sign." And so they put the cuffs on me and put me in the back of a paddy wagon and drove me around behind the hangar, where I had the unique opportunity of watching Air Force One land between the bars of the paddy wagon. And George Bush went into this hangar and gave a speech. This is before the war had started. He gave a speech about how they hate us because we're so free.
I see.
And I'm laying outside handcuffed with my hands behind my back in a paddy wagon.
He was fighting for freedom. He's fighting for freedom. Yeah.
So the state charges were, as we expected, they were dropped. And a couple of days before the charges were dropped, I got another one of those phone calls I hate to get from the media wanting my comments on the federal charges. And I said, "What federal charges?" And they said, "Well, Scott Schools announced today that you were being charged," and read some statute number. And I said, "Well, what is that?" And they didn't know. And I Googled the statute, and the headline came up, "Presidential Assassinations, Kidnappings, and Threats." And I said, "Uh-oh." And so
you were a threat to the president. That's what they were saying.
I was charged under that statute.
I see.
It turns out that statute went on the books in 1971. And in the 30-plus years it had been on the books, I'm the only person ever convicted under it. And so they used a fairly obscure statute. 4 months after the event, I was charged and went to trial in federal court. It's a federal misdemeanor at the time, and kind of a rare area of law. And I found out only after the proceedings had started that I wasn't entitled to a jury trial. And I didn't know. I mean,
so that was part of the law, that you're not entitled to a jury trial?
Yeah, the First Amendment clearly went out the window, and then there went the Sixth Amendment. There's some federal statute that's been on the books for some while now that says that if you're charged with a misdemeanor that carries less than 6 months in jail or a $5,000 fine, you can be tried with a bench trial without a jury.
So this Scott Schools, who was he?
Well, I'd never heard of the fellow before he announced that the U.S. Attorney's Office was bringing charges against me. And it turns out that he is a deputy U.S. Attorney. He was the number 2 guy in the office. Now, you have to remember, at that time, the number 1 guy in the office was Strom Thurmond Jr., the youngest U.S. Attorney ever. He's 28 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone believes that Jr. was given the seat kind of as a going-away present for his father. And there's little question that Strom Thurmond Jr., at 28 years old and without much experience, there's little question that he was really running the office. And so I'm led to believe that the Deputy U.S. Attorney, Scott Schools, was actually running the office then. And he did not participate in my prosecution, but the attorneys that I know here in Columbia said that wasn't unusual, that he didn't spend much time in court, that he was seen as kind of the office politician.
I see. Now, were you surprised to hear that this Scott Schools has turned up here in San Francisco as one of the attorneys replacing the U.S. attorney that was fired by President Bush?
Well, I was saddened to wish that upon San Francisco. Mr. Schools is the type of fella I think that the Bush administration would use in that type of instance. Schools is from Charleston, from a very wealthy family that has been involved in the ownership of the Piggly Wiggly stores. I don't know if folks in San Francisco have ever been to a Piggly Wiggly, but it's actually one of the first grocery chains, started back in the 40s, and it's quite a force in South Carolina. Actually, I think it's about the 12th largest company in South Carolina. And Scott Schools is seen as somebody who, a friend of mine in Charleston said that he doesn't need to work, that he has enough money where he doesn't practice law like the rest of us do.
Mm-hmm.
For him, it's a sport, and that there's some legitimate observations that Mr. Schools is more of a practicing politician than a practicing attorney, and that he's ambitious, and he's been a donor to the Republican Party, and is seen as a darling and a rising star in the South Carolina Republican Party. And he's exactly the type of yes man that the Justice Department would put in San Francisco to stem the tide down there.
So you think that the kind of retaliatory prosecution they had against you for carrying a sign against President Bush could be a danger to people in Northern California if he's actually able to take this position?
Well, I certainly would not expect that Mr. Schools would stop that type of frivolous prosecution. He had an opportunity to do that when he was Deputy U.S. Attorney here and didn't take it.
So we can be forewarned that we are in maybe for some of the same kind of attacks that you faced for simply carrying a sign against President Bush.
I would certainly advise people to be on guard against whatever winds are blowing out of the Bush White House.
Okay, well, I think we've gotten some important information about the new U.S. attorney that's been appointed by President Bush after firing the Ryan, who is the past U.S. attorney. And I think thanks for joining us, Brett, to let us know about the record of the new U.S. attorney, because I think people in Northern California should have forewarning that they've got a new district attorney, a U.S. attorney in town.
Well, good luck, Steve, and I'm standing by to do what I can to help my labor comrades in California.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch with you, Brett.
You bet.